There's a well-known story from the great space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. It's often told as a joke, more parable than fact. It's said that NASA spent millions of dollars to develop a highly specialized pen that would work in zero gravity. Who's heard about the space pen? As the story goes, their brilliant engineers worked tirelessly to craft the most amazing writing utensil the world had ever seen. And after months of labor, they finally released the Fisher Space Pen. It used pressurized cartridges and a newly invented resin-bonded ink that could remain solid until it was pushed up into the tip of the pen and began to melt with the friction as the astronauts would write. According to their archives, the agency found the pens worked in all positions, in extreme heat and cold, and in atmospheres ranging from pure oxygen to vacuum. And they held enough ink to draw a solid line for 3 miles, well beyond NASA's half-kilometer requirement. The Russians, meanwhile, used pencils. Of course, the story isn't historically accurate. NASA didn't fund the pen, and both nations eventually wound up using those Fisher space pens. They were a superior product. But the parable still lands. Sometimes we let complexity overshadow purpose. Sometimes we're so intent on solving secondary problems that we forget why we're here in the first place. We focus too much on ultimately trivial concerns while leaving core commitments unattended. This has come to be known colloquially as letting the tail wag the dog. But this tendency to overcomplicate isn't just an engineering problem. It shows up in life and death situations. Another version of this phenomenon was documented in the letters of Florence Nightingale, the inspirational founder of modern nursing. During the Crimean War, Nightingale arrived at the British field hospitals in Scutari and found the conditions to be appalling. Wounded soldiers lying in filth, rampant disease, and wholly inadequate sanitation. She introduced and instituted revolutionary practices, ventilation, hand washing, proper nutrition, all of which dramatically reduced mortality. And yet all of those advancements had to overcome opposition from hospital administrators who were more concerned with protecting supplies than saving lives. During one particularly notable standoff, the administrators refused to release clean sheets and clothing from locked storerooms because the relevant paperwork had not been properly processed. Even as soldiers immediately in need of clean bandages and bedding lay dying of infection, the military bureaucracy insisted no requisition, no linen. Outraged, Nightingale broke protocol. She ordered that the storerooms be opened without permission, and she was declaring, in essence, what good is a linen inventory if there are no men left to clothe? The administrators were letting the tail wag the dog. Our gospel passage this morning documents one of the clearest examples of this same phenomenon in the whole of the Bible. Jesus had come to a certain village and was welcomed into the home of Martha and her sister Mary. Jesus began to teach, and Mary, enraptured, sat at his feet, hanging on every word. She recognized him for who he was and was listening attentively to everything that he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many responsibilities. She was preoccupied with the expectations of hospitality, with welcoming, offering water for hand in foot washing, cooking, cleaning. And let's be clear, those aren't bad things. In fact, in those days, all of what Martha was doing was considered a sacred duty, rather than simply a mere social nicety. Biblical law specifically highlights hospitality towards strangers and travelers as a religious obligation. You can imagine with me that in a harsh desert climate with few inns or hostels, how hospitality could mean life or death for pilgrims and sojourners. So we can be deeply empathetic with Martha, we who also consider it a sacred duty to be hospitable, to make sure our homes and our hallways are clean, to make sure our fellowship hour is filled with wonderful coffee and food. We want to be so open and welcoming and prepared for visitors. All of that's true. And yet, in zooming out, the reality of the situation becomes inescapable. Martha was so distracted by the busyness of what she believed she was expected to do that she had become utterly inattentive to the particularity of this particular and special person for whom her hospitality was intended, her guest, Jesus, the Christ. Seeming to completely miss the importance of what was happening in her own home, she interrupts Jesus in the middle of his teaching. She stops him in the middle of his teaching to say something perhaps less important. Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Now, Jesus' answer cuts directly to the quick of the matter. Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but few things are actually needed. Few things are actually needed. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. It's a call to simplicity. No over-engineered space pens here. It's a reminder of purpose. No administrative bureaucracy is welcome. It's an invitation to lay aside unhelpful personal and social expectations and instead just be in the presence of God. Isn't that the main point of this faith that we talk about and proclaim and preach? We declare that God created humanity with a desire to be in relationship with us. That was how this whole thing got started in the Garden of Eden, right? God wanted to be in the garden and have companionship and be with us. And far too often, we're so thoroughly caught up in the busyness of the work to actually pay attention to God, to actually listen for the movement of the Holy Spirit and be led accordingly. When was the last time you laid aside the business of the church, stilled yourself, and just prayed? This tension between religious duty and sacred presence wasn't unique to Martha's kitchen. It was a central conflict throughout Christ's ministry. We hear about it all the time throughout the New Testament. And it's revealed especially strongly in those moments and scenarios when Jesus and the disciples come into conflict with the Pharisees. The latter, the Pharisees, strongly believed that strict observance of the law was critical to the coming of the Messiah and the restoration of Israel. And yet, when the Messiah had actually come among them, when the Messiah had actually appeared in their midst with an intention to do something entirely different from what the Pharisees expected, they could not recognize him and actively disrupted his mission and ministry. You may recall, we heard several weeks ago, how they attacked Jesus for gleaning from the fields on the Sabbath. And his response was The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. These rules and obligations, these systems and structures, they're here to help us. They're here to benefit us. They're not there for us to serve them. The same principle is at work here in our story about Martha and Mary. Expectations about the Sabbath or about hospitality, they're intended to build and enhance holy relationships, not distract from them or damage them. And if we become overly fixated on the form of religious observance, the form of worship, we can miss its actual intended function, which is to draw us into deeper and more holy relationship with God and with one another. This isn't to say that the work of the church isn't important. It's not to say that all the various day-to-day errands don't need to be done. Jesus didn't tell Martha to stop what she was doing. But I think his purpose was very clear and hard to avoid or otherwise get around when he says, Mary has chosen the better part. Intimacy with God is more important than the busyness of the church. Intimacy with God is more important than the busyness of the church. When we actually encounter Christ, all of the things we previously thought were critical are revealed for what they truly were all along, inconsequential. And that's how the story about Martha and Mary goes beyond this one interaction. It goes beyond this one kitchen, beyond this one household. It goes beyond Sabbath or hospitality. In fact, it serves as a larger parable about tempering our religious obligations with the importance and imperative of sacred relationships. Whether it be in our private lives and our personal relationships, or here at church as a congregation, or as a denomination, or as a larger faith movement, this story reminds us to keep Christ at the center of our devotion and not become overly distracted by all the day-to-day complications and tasks that need to be done. It's like what Florence Nightingale did in that war hospital. The church is often called to do in its own wounded, weary institutions what she did. Sometimes we become so preoccupied with preserving organizational structures or just the way we've always done things that those activities no longer serve the purposes to which they were originally intended. We worship the housing, the shell, the building, the outer appearance of things, fixating on rules and regulations while ignoring whether the spirit for which they were created is actually being enacted and manifested in the world. Like automatons, we can slip into repeating the same lines, the same patterns, the same habits. It's easier, after all, to just keep doing what we've always done and call it good. But sometimes it takes prophetic courage to shake us out of our stupor and realize that something needs to change. So here's my challenge for you this week. Either personally or as a congregation, what are the clean linens in our spiritual lives that we've been keeping locked up under lock and key? What religious busy work are you using to avoid actually sitting still in God's presence? What committee meetings or church tasks or spiritual to-do lists have become more important than actually encountering the risen Christ? Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet. She chose presence over productivity, relationship over routine. In our world of endless distractions and obligations, both sacred and secular, actually making the choice, the devotional choice, to be still and quiet and seek the presence of God may be the most radical witness of all. So this week I invite you to choose the better part. Still yourself. Lay aside the business of faith and simply be with your God. Listen for the movement of the Holy Spirit. Because when we actually encounter Christ, everything else finds its proper place and we remember what truly matters. May it be so.